They say money talks, but what happens when it whispers in Congress's ear? Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number. I'm your co-host Stephen, joined by the always brilliant Sarah. Today we're talking about Restoring Faith in Government Act, a bipartisan effort to stop congressional stock trading and hopefully restore some trust in our lawmakers. Sarah, are you ready to dive in?
Always ready, Stephen. And this is a very juicy topic this week: ethics, stocks, and Congress. So before we kind of kick off everything, let's talk a little bit about insider trading and what's going on with this entire situation. In general, we're kind of familiar with insider trading as it relates to corporations. So people who are working at a corporation, trading on information that they know because they're employees of a corporation. If you ever work for a public company, you might get stock as part of your benefits package, but there's trading windows where you're allowed to buy and sell your stock, and otherwise you have to hold on to it. So there might be a huge market uptick, but it isn't during a trading window, so you can't trade. And there's huge stories like the Galleon Group, where there was insider trading and where the FBI arrested Raj in 2009. And this case involved insider trading on several publicly traded companies because he was getting information from big places that were working with many different companies like IBM, McKinsey, Intel. And it was kind of this huge issue. Other huge cases with ImClone trading stock. There was a Reebok insider trading issue, the Kidder Peabody scandal of the 1980s. So this has been an issue for a really long time. And it's interesting because at the beginning of the 2000s, we started talking about, well, doesn't Congress kind of have insider trading information? They are in these committee hearings based off of laws that can obviously impact companies in their ability to do business. So, a stock might go up if they rule one way, a stock might go down if they, vote another way. So it's a pretty interesting thing going on. And even in the US, we had the Stock Act a while ago, which we'll talk about in a second here, but people have kind of caught on to the fact that Congress is doing this and is trading off information that the rest of us don't have access to. And there's these companies, there's this one called Autopilot that just tracks Nancy Pelosi's trades, and you can invest money with them and just do exactly what Nancy Pelosi does. And people are like making a ton of money off of just like copying her, and it's a little bit delayed because of the reporting, but there's a Reddit Congress stock tracker, there's all this other stuff, so it's pretty crazy.
It is, and it is a big thing as well. So in the UK, I mean, we obviously have very similar laws. Insider trading is, it's a criminal offence, and it is enforced. So it's very difficult to enforce such things, and you very rarely see sort of really big cases coming forward. But in terms of our members of Parliament, the laws again, they're not particularly strong, not particularly explicit. But members have to declare if they own stock worth more than 15% of a company or more than £70,000, which is about $100,000 or so. So and journalists in particular get quite frustrated by this because they say, well, what about, if they own slightly less than that,
Right.
then surely they could still influence, couldn't they? It seems like quite an arbitrary threshold to set. Shouldn't they just declare everything? But then obviously, if you only own very small amounts of shares, it's unlikely to sort of be an issue. So where exactly do you draw that line? Because it's surprisingly difficult to find out the shares that people own. Certainly in the UK, it's all quite secretive, and so you have to work really hard to actually find out what shares people own, and often pay quite a lot of money for the information. So it's an issue. I mean, we have different sort of types of scandals. I mean, I sort of remember one particularly huge one was at the election back
Yes.
in sort of last summer, when obviously the prime minister can say exactly when the general election happens, and no one knows beforehand. It's a big secret.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously a lot of betting on it,
Mm-hmm.
because you can bet on anything you want. The
These
bookmakers
days,
will
yeah.
will be happy to let you make a bet on
Yeah.
anything you want. So lots and lots of people bet on the date of the election. And what they noticed, of course, after the election was called, there was a sudden spike in bets being placed on that particular date for the election. And when they looked into it, they found it was a variety of insiders who obviously had information about the upcoming announcement, and they then faced criminal charges because it is illegal to make a bet if you actually know that something is definitely going to happen. You're not then allowed to make a bet on it and earn money from it, because obviously the bookmakers, well, they want to win, don't they?
Wasn't also part of it that people who were on the Tory side were betting against the Tories to win? Wasn't that like another little piece of it
Oh,
as well?
yes, that's
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 what I
always a
thought
big
you were
thing because
talking
you
about when
can
you
obviously
first
have
started
betting
talking
elections.
about it. I
No,
didn't realize
no,
there
you
was a
can
thing
bet on the
about the
date and you can
date.
bet on who's going to win. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, they do. Some of them said it was just like a bit of a tradition, that so if you people MPs basically betting that they will lose their own
Yeah.
seats because then if you lose, obviously the sort of crushing disappointment is offset by the fact that you
You made
made a
some
few
money,
quid.
you know?
So,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
But it's
I
not so much stock trading.
That is so funny because I remember hearing about it and I just thought it was having to do with them betting against themselves, betting to see how it was ending. I had no idea that it had anything to do with this date situation. So
Yes.
that kind of I guess brings us into a lot of this of politics are weird everywhere. Rules are weird
Yeah.
everywhere. We know when the election is in the US all the time. Can't make any money off that except for if you're voting, one way or the other. But
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting to see how into what you were talking about of you have to report if you own over 100,000. So if everybody
hmm
owns, 99,000 pounds of something and then they spread it
hmm
across 5 industries and all 5 industries are getting impacted by the same ruling or whatever is coming out, they're still making a ton of money off of that and they don't have to
Yeah.
report it. And so it's all these kinds of little needles being thread where people are kind of gaming the
Mm.
system and making money off of this. And I think, that kind of brings us into what we're talking about today, where this bill that we're talking about is called Restoring Faith in Government Act and it has everything to do with
Exactly.
stock trading. So I think, let's dive in.
Absolutely. It is part of this broader issue about what do we do to try and restore faith in our democracy, our elected leaders. So let's kick things off then with the basics. So why is it such a big deal? So what's wrong with members of Congress trading stocks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question and it might seem kind of obvious, but most members of Congress have access to this non public information like we've been talking about. They know upcoming legislation that they might be filing or regulatory
hmm
changes. A lot of them serve on special committees where they have closed door hearings where they're kind of listening to things and then, they're going to take
hmm
actions one way or another based off of what they hear inside of there. And it can really significantly impact our markets when they trade stocks, even if it's technically legal. This creates a perception of conflict of interest. And if they're making these trades based off this information that only they are privy to, at best, it looks really shady. And at worst, it's really eroding public trust. And in a time where the wealth gap has never been bigger, we're seeing wealth gaps like we were at the Gilded Age. These types of issues are really
Yeah.
pervasive in our government.
Absolutely. And the numbers do seem to back that up as well. I read somewhere that in 2024, lawmakers' stock portfolios outperformed the S&P 500. So what's going on there? Are they sort of geniuses in terms of investment? What are they doing as what are they doing in Congress if they're so good at actually playing the stock market?
It's a clairvoyant Congress, as I like to say. No, no,
hmm
no. I mean, they didn't just outperform the S&P; they absolutely crushed it. Democrats saw a 31% gain, Republicans 26% gain, while the S&P managed 24.9%. So it's hard to wonder if insider knowledge is not playing a role. How does that happen? Is there clairvoyance? It seems a plus B equals C here. And when
hmm
regular Americans like myself see those numbers, it's really easy to feel like this deck is stacked against us and that, politics is not necessarily representing people for the people. And, it's a lot of get rich quick schemes feelings around people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, politicians do tend to be richer than the average, and there are
hmm
reasons for that. Often they do come from sort of moneyed backgrounds, but often it's just that they tend to be highly competent people who therefore can make a lot of money. So they
hmm
do,
Yeah.
and that's fine. And obviously, there's nothing wrong with that, is there? But if they are actually enriching themselves when they should actually be representing the people, then that is a big problem, isn't it? So that brings us to the Restoring Faith in Government Act. So, what does the bill propose, and how is it different from previous efforts like the Stock Act?
Yeah, so the Stock Act was passed in 2012, and this really focused on transparency. And, back in the early 2000s, people started realizing that maybe with politicians doing these trades and not knowing what was going on, we needed to know something. And so this act required lawmakers to disclose their trades within a specific time frame and make these disclosures public. But it didn't ban outright trading. So it was really focused on, well, if you're going going to do it, people at least need to know what you're doing. They at least need to know where your mind's at, what you think is happening. And that's how these companies like Autopilot or Reddit Stock Tracker have kind of come about, because they're tracking these things. And, this was signed in 2012 by Obama. And this Restoring Faith in Government Act actually goes much further than this. It proposes a complete ban on individual stock ownership and trading for members of Congress, their spouses, and dependents.
Wow. I mean, that is quite radical. It's an extremely bold thing, particularly as it obviously goes beyond the members of Congress themselves, if it covers their spouses and dependents. So their entire families are now banned from any kind of stock ownership. It says individual stock ownership. So is it any kind of stocks, or just the kind of stocks that might be impacted by the legislation that they're enacting?
It's individual stocks, so any type of stock that you own as an individual thing instead of kind of a fund or something like that. And so, this does seem really bold, but if you ever worked somewhere like McKinsey or IBM or KPMG, you can be something that's called a covered member. And that means that you also are not allowed to own any stocks, because a lot of these companies are doing strategic audits, and they might know if a layoff is coming. They might know if this is coming. They might know if, XYZ company is going to start building chips or whatever it is. And so you actually have to hold these funds that are managed outside, and you can invest your money that way, but you're never owning an individual thing, and it's kind of this mix. And so this seems really bold, but actually a ton of people in business, when they are in places where they can have insider information, are covered by this. And I used to work at KPMG, and when I worked there, I wasn't even married at the time, but Patrick couldn't own a lot of the stuff that I was working with because of these types of covered member and these rules.
So that is pretty bold then, but perhaps not as extreme as it might seem if it's sort of common practice in other companies as well. But so do you think it's really necessary?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems really bold for what they currently operate under. And many people think that although the transparency is great, this isn't going far enough with the Stock Act, and we need to go further with this Restoring Faith in Government Act. And even with the Stock Act, the enforcement hasn't really been consistent, and the penalties for not reporting or not reporting in time are really minimal. And so there's not a whole bunch of kind of dedication or reason why people would even be following kind of this bare minimum of just saying what you're doing. And a lot of people think that these kind of laughable violations and non-enforcement of it is another reason of why this is kind of shady. If you're just having to report, why aren't you just reporting? It's literally the bare minimum. So yeah, this new bill really aims to elevate the appearance of not having impropriety within the Congress. So, it's interesting for sure.
Well, you're right there, Sarah. I mean, studies have found that about 1 in 7 members of Congress have violated the Stock Act's reporting requirements. And yeah, a small fine obviously isn't going to act as much of a deterrent, really. So what's to stop this continuing? So let's talk about some high-profile cases that have brought this issue into the spotlight. So I know Senator Richard Burr and ex-Speaker Nancy Pelosi have both been in the headlines. So can you break those down for us?
So Senator Burr sold stocks right after the classified COVID-19 briefing, and this was in the early days of the pandemic. And this is actually one of the first times I ever remember thinking about insider trading with stocks. I think it's something I was aware of, but I remember seeing reporting on this, and this guy just like offloaded a ton of stock because he thought the market was going to tank, and it was a closed briefing. He made a ton of money because he did something at a huge high. The market obviously tanked, as we all remember. And I just remember being so confused about how this was even legal. And the SEC did not take action. They investigated, but the timing raised a ton of eyebrows, mine included. And then there's Nancy Pelosi and her husband, and they have just been in the news all the time with their stock trades. They do a ton of trading. Like I said, there's things that are literally just tracking what they're doing, and people are following them and with their investment portfolios. And they're also up, maybe not the 70% that Nancy Pelosi is, but even if you split the difference there, you're making a ton of money. And her husband actually sold millions in chip stocks right before Congress voted on chip production legislation for making more chips. I think it was in the States or something like that. But however it was, was a spokesperson for them said that he took a loss, but the optics were really terrible. And it was kind of like, did you make a mistake? But you were definitely trying to trade on something that wasn't known. So really kind of dramatic areas.
It really is, and there have been a ton of stories about this in the press, and they are fueling the public demand for change. So, how do Americans generally feel about a congressional stock trading ban?
Actually, overwhelmingly supportive, if you could believe. But polls show that 86% of Americans favor banning stock trading for Congress, and that includes 87% of Republicans, 88% of Democrats, and 81% of independents. So it's really rare to see this type of bipartisan agreement on anything these days, and nevertheless this high.
Yes, absolutely. That's crazy. You can't get 88% of people to agree on anything. So the bill has public support and bipartisan sponsorship, and it was introduced in the last session. It didn't pass, and it's being reintroduced this time. So what's the problem with it? Why didn't it pass last time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, while this bill has momentum, there's public support, there is concerns about unintended consequences, and critics argue that banning stock ownership could discourage qualified people from running for office, especially those with significant investments or family businesses. So if you become something like a covered member, you have to divest from things. So when I worked at KPMG, I had to offload some things that I had, done in years past. And I know a friend that his grandma put him into some investment fund when he was a baby, and he had to transfer that fund to his dad because he wasn't allowed to own it. And so there's things like that can kind of happen that they think will detract what kind of you were talking about earlier of these really high performing, intelligent people coming to serve in our Congress, because essentially the quiet part is being said out loud. It's not necessarily a cash cow anymore, or they'll have to make a significant kind of sacrifice to be able to serve because they'll have to divest from things that they might not want to. And of course, there's always resistance to any change within Congress itself.
Yes, of course, because Congress isn't really known for being nimble and making change easily. This bill was introduced in the 118th Congress. It's been reintroduced in the 119th. But it's not the only type of bill like this, is it?
Correct. This bill has been proposed before, is back again. I think we'll see it again next year if it doesn't happen this year. But there was also this bill called the Ethics Act that was introduced last year that had really similar goals, but again, didn't quite gain the traction that it needed to move forward. And this bill actually went even further because it also included the president and VP, which again, you're kind of like, wow, the president and VP can trade stocks. Talk about insider information. They know a lot of stuff that none of us know and probably will never know. So, that's again kind of just this crazy little piece of our world. It just seems so reasonable to be like, yeah, we shouldn't be doing this, but here we are.
Yeah.
What's kind of different now is there is growing public pressure. There's really high profile endorsements for this. AOC has really talked about this a lot. Even this brand Autopilot that is tracking Nancy Pelosi and other stock people is consistently saying, it's so crazy. She beat the portfolio by 70% last year. You can follow her, but this is messed up and it should be illegal. But while it's not, you, the American people, make money off of these people. And even President Biden, who has been pretty vocal about the needs to reform in his last month in office, the ball is rolling and people are paying attention now.
Absolutely. I mean, Biden even mentioned it in his farewell address, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. I think the quote was something along the lines of, we need members of Congress to be banned from trading stocks while they're in Congress. And he really pointed out that the concentration of power and wealth erodes the unity and trust, which, we're seeing everywhere in the U.S. And this is definitely something that is along those lines. And it was a pretty strong statement, in my opinion, and it really underscored how critical this issue has become.
Yeah, so let's talk about the potential impact then. If the Restoring Faith in Government Act does pass, what changes can we expect to see?
Well, for starters, it would eliminate the appearance of financial conflicts of interest. And this is really about restoring trust and showing that lawmakers are prioritizing the public good over personal financial gain. It's really easy to think that if you own, $500,000 of a stock of XYZ company and you're ruling on whatever secret committee that you're on could impact it and, bring that stock price from 100 to 1,000 or from 100 to 1, that might be impacting how you're going to vote for things, and you're not moving with the idea of public good at the forefront. It could also set a precedent for similar reforms at other levels of government, like the VP and president, but even other areas in the government, there's still people who definitely have access to insider information.
So what happens then if it doesn't pass?
If it doesn't pass, we're likely to see more of the same. So the eroding of trust in the government and growing cynicism among voters and kind of wondering what people are doing and why. But even if this bill fails, the fact that it's being discussed, that Biden talked about it, it really shows that it's gaining momentum. And we had the Ethics Act as well as this Reforming Faith in Government Act last year. We have Reforming Faith in Government again this year. I'm sure we'll see some other kind of flavors of this bill be proposed this year, but we're going to keep hearing about it at least.
I think we will. And obviously, if it doesn't pass, then people will carry on making money out of Nancy Pelosi. And I suppose she didn't really object to that. But, maybe we should all get there.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, thanks very much. You've given us a lot to think about. And as you say, this issue isn't going away anytime soon.
Yeah, definitely not. Whether it's the Restoring Faith in Government Act or something else down the line, the push for reform in this sector is growing stronger and stronger by the day.
There it is. So thanks for breaking it all down, Sarah. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to another episode of Beyond the Bill Number. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share your thoughts. So do you think Congress should be banned from trading stocks? Let us know in the comments.